Terror in the Cabin. Written and narrated by Steve Gray. Asher had been feeling suffocated by the hustle and bustle of his chaotic city life for weeks. The constant noise, the endless stream of people, the never-ending din of car horns and sirens. It was all starting to get to him. He needed a break, a chance to get away from it all and recharge his batteries. So, he packed up his '88 Plymouth and set off for a secluded cabin deep in the woods, hoping to spend a peaceful weekend surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. As he drove down the winding forest road, the GPS on his phone leading him further and further away from civilization, he felt his tension begin to ease. The trees grew taller and closer together, casting long, ominous shadows on the ground, but he wasn't bothered. He was looking forward to a weekend of solitude, of reading books, drinking coffee, and enjoying the peace and quiet. Finally, he arrived at the cabin, a small, rustic affair nestled among the trees and cypress knees. It was old and worn, but it looked sturdy enough, and Asher was grateful to have made it. He grabbed his bag and stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath of the crisp forest air. As he approached the cabin, he noticed something weird. The trees surrounding the clearing seemed to be watching him. They were infested with huge, cawing crows, and the branches seemed to be twisted and gnarled, like skeletal fingers reaching out to snatch at him. He shivered despite the warmth of the day and pushed the feeling aside. He was just being paranoid, he told himself. He unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside, looking around at the musty, dismal interior. He walked forward to reach an old web-covered oil lantern sitting on top of a table. The creaking of the old wooden floorboards sounded off beneath his feet. He began to unpack, settling in for a relaxing weekend. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Asher started to feel a creeping sense of unease. He tried to shake it off, telling himself he was just spooked by the isolation. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being observed by someone, or something. It wasn't until he heard the first strange noise that he realized that he might not be alone. At first, it was just a faint rustling, like leaves blowing in the wind. But then it grew louder, more insistent, and his heart began to race. He was convincing himself that it was just an animal. But deep down, he felt that it was something more. Suddenly, the door to the cabin creaked open, and Asher spun around, his heart in his throat. But there was no one there. The wind died down, sending in a few dry, rustling leaves onto the floorboards of the cabin, and then an oppressive silence fell over the interior. Asher chuckled. It was just the wind. He figured something was out there, just not what his fatigued mind was creating. Soon after, his rationale began to be tested as he started noticing quickly moving silhouettes outside the cabin windows. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the eye, as when he looked directly at where his periphery caught the movement, nothing was there. This continued for quite some time, until finally he had had enough. And he had to confirm it to himself that there was absolutely nothing to worry about, and that he was just working himself up. After all, he hadn't been in settings like this since he was just a small child. So he opened the door to the cabin and craned his neck and looked around outside at the wind rustling through the gnarled trees. Soon, it turned out that his deep, inner feeling of dread was actually well-founded. A short time after he had closed the cabin door and walked toward the sink to get a glass of water, the door bursted open and several figures stood without and were blanketed in the darkness outside. They were coming inside the cabin. The first one was a woman, her face twisted into a grotesque grimace, her eyes as black as coal. She was followed by a man, his skin gray and decaying, his eyes empty and cold. The both of them were gibbering what sounded like incoherence. or some foreign language that Asher couldn't understand. And then, more and more of them, all of them, rising from some overgrown and forgotten cemetery by the cabin, their bodies reanimated by some dark and malevolent force. Asher knew he had to act fast. He grabbed a nearby axe and went to defend himself. He knew it wouldn't be enough, but he fought hard. The dead were now becoming relentless, driven by a hunger for the soul of this living one. He was vastly outnumbered. He fought hard, harder even still, swinging the axe with all he had, reducing the attacking dead to bloody bits. But they just kept coming. They were relentless, driven by animalistic rage, and Asher was starting to tire. His arms were turning to jelly. Just when he thought all was lost, he remembered the cabin's fireplace. He grabbed a nearby poker and plunged it into the body of the fire. He then used it to defend himself against the horrors of the undead. The hot metal seared through the lot of them. He then took the oil lantern and rifled it at the feet of the dead, and watched in amazement as it caused them to explode in a fiery volley of raging flames, sending them stumbling back. That gave him a small window of opportunity. He took advantage of it, grabbing his bag and making a run for the car. He didn't dare look back, fearing what he might see. He just kept running, his heart pounding in his chest, until he reached the safety of his ride. As he sped away from the cabin, Asher caught a glimpse of the dead who shambled out of the now burning cabin, which was becoming engulfed in an inferno. But they were still coming, though. Still shambling after him, their eyes fixed on him with an unblinking stare, even though their bodies were being reduced steadily to ash as they were consumed by fire. Asher knew he had to get as far away from that place as possible, to find help and get back to civilization. He didn't stop driving until he was back in the city, surrounded by the noise and chaos he had once found so overwhelming. Now it was a welcome respite from the horrors he had faced in the woods. He knew he would never forget that weekend, the terror he had faced in that desolate cabin. He knew that he would never be able to shake the feeling of being watched, of being haunted by the evil presence that dwelled in those woods. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. As he pulled into his driveway, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. His eyes were haunted, and he noticed strangely that his skeletal features were more pronounced. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his face was gaunt. A shock of gray ran through the left side of his hairline. Horrified by his new look, he was met with the reality of what he had faced. He would never be the same again. The horrors he had faced would stay with him now forever. As he stared at himself in the rearview mirror even longer, he began to gibber in some form of an ancient language that even he couldn't understand as he spoke.